Well, the rumours are heating up over Apple's new M1X MacBook Pros, so I thought it'd be a good time to take a look at their first set of homegrown silicon chips, the M1, and see how they've been performing as my daily computer. Hello, my name is Roland K. Smith and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I create digital content for a living. Now, it just so happened that I was in desperate need of a new laptop when Apple announced the new M1 MacBook, so I was stoked. In fact, I've been using my 2018 iPad Pro as my daily computer and for professional work. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a video on what it's like to use an iPad Pro for professional work. Spoiler, it's not great, but you can do it. Now, I was tempted by the Pro, but I knew that there'd be a bigger, more powerful Pro just around the corner, and convinced by the early reviews that the M1 MacBook Air would do just fine for all my video editing needs, I picked myself up a 512 16GB MacBook Air in space grey. Was it a mistake? Was it a revelation? Well, it was sort of both. Let me explain. Now I want to start with the design because this is my first time owning a MacBook Air, and I've got to say I friggin' love the wedge shape. It just feels really good in the hand, you know, and like on the chest, like you could just sort of walk around campus or the office all day holding it. It's got a nice sharpness on one side and then a nice heft to it on the other. In fact, the slope created by the wedge makes for a comfortable typing experience. The wrists and the hands sit really nicely on the keys. And speaking of the keyboard, these keys are sensational. Now, the older style keyboards didn't bother me as much as they did sort of seem to bother some other people. But going back to type on my wife's older MacBook Pro, they just feel really clacky and cheap, whereas this MacBook Air has a nice satisfying thud. I think we're going to see a significant update to the MacBook Air in terms of design in 2021, so these bezels might get put to shame, but really, on a laptop, who cares about bezels? I mean, sure, they're not as slim as some of the other designs out there, but they're hardly big and chunky, and they're not getting in the way. Now, the two USB-C ports are limiting. For a start, they're only on one side, so if your desk setup is on the left side, you're fine, but if it's on the right, you might have to do a little bit of sort of weird wiring around the back and then off to the side and like plug it in. And it's not ideal, but it's not a deal breaker either, because if you're running like an external display and some hard drives, you're probably going to have to get a USB-C adapter dongle anyway and live that dongle life. Now, I'm often using both ports at once. I'm transferring data off an SD onto an external hard drive, and that's fine for these two ports. But if I was having to charge the laptop as well, then I'd run into some trouble. Okay, so the real update here is battery life and the performance. But first, battery life. It's a revelation. I mean, Apple laptops have always had pretty good battery life, but this is another level. This makes it, without a doubt, the best battery life on a laptop in the world. So long as I'm not doing any really intensive tasks like video editing or graphic design, I can get through a week without plugging this thing in. I mean, it has completely cured me of my battery anxiety. So yeah, booting up Final Cut Pro or Lightroom is going to drain the battery a lot faster, but you could still get through an entire session without having to plug it in. And that's not something I've been able to say about other laptops. So if you are a content creating road warrior, then this might be the laptop for you. Now, performance. So this is the first MacBook to use Apple's new processor, the M1, and they have their competition beat by a mile here. It's really, really good. Other videos have gone through how good the M1 is. They've run all the tests. I'm not going to get into it here, but I will just say this. It's a snappy boy. Boot up times are really quick, apps open and close in the blink of an eye. Safari has never felt faster. And if you spend a lot of time in your browser doing emails, Canva, Facebook Studio, all that sort of stuff, this is going to be a really good experience for you. Now, the hype around the M1 MacBook Air and what sold me on it was that it could do the heavy lifting of a much more expensive computer with much higher specs. And it sort of can. Here's my use case for a job. I'm importing about 60GB of 4K, 400 megabytes a second log footage in Final Cut Pro. I'm then correcting color and exposure using a LUT, couple of transitions, some text, and throwing on EQ, compression, and noise reduction on the audio track. Now, it's a smooth enough editing experience, and the export times are pretty fast. But I am seeing drop frames, the occasional crashes, and that dreaded spinning beach ball. But that's just my experience editing in Final Cut Pro on a laptop. I've had much more expensive machines that have performed the exact same way. So for a machine that is this cheap and this small and light to be able to comfortably edit, that's impressive. Now, I do have some much larger video projects coming up, and I'm not entirely confident that the MacBook Air will be able to handle it. So we'll have to see. But for most of my client work and for my YouTube work, it's absolutely fine. So battery life is a revelation. The performance is very, very good. I love the form factor. Why was it a mistake? User error. I should have forked out more money for the 2TB bits, because with 512 video editing, I'm constantly working off an external hard drive, which is absolutely fine. But the problem is that I then miss out on that small light air experience, you know? Like, I'm just lugging around this extra hard drive and it's sort of flapping everywhere when I put it on the desk. So my bad there. So this was only ever going to be a short-term laptop for me. I knew that a better one was coming, but I needed it now. I didn't want to overinvest, and it's been absolutely fine for my purposes. And it's something that I would recommend to most people. I think most people will be fine with this laptop. Now, I will probably buy that rumored 14-inch MacBook Pro, and I'll just absolutely spec it out, and that'll be my main video editing machine. But for a temporary solution, this has been a valiant companion. Okay, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed my opinions on the M1 MacBook Air. Let me know in the comments if you're thinking of picking one of these bad boys up, or if you're gonna wait for the new ones, the rumored M1Xs. We'll see how they go. All right, until the next video, keep doing what you're doing.